Welcome to Creator's Edge Studio. I'm Tom Marcoux.
And I'm John Colton.
Here at Creator's Edge Studio, we talk about pop culture and things that are fun. And we have a philosophy of teach me something I can use. In this episode, we're talking about Dracula and vampires. I'm excited to have as our guest, David MacDowell Blue. David is an author and playwright of vampire-related plays and other plays. He's a reviewer of the theater scene in Los Angeles. Welcome, David.
Yes, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Excellent. David, let's get right to it, because I've known you for decades, and in those decades, I know that you've developed an expertise about vampires, or even beyond our friendship, you've truly been connected to vampires and Dracula. What drives your fascination with Dracula and vampires?
Oh, I think it started with Dark Shadows when I was a child. And something about them grabbed my imagination. With some people, it's fairies. Some people, it's sports teams. With me, it was vampires.
Got it. What specifically about vampires, though?
They sort of embody tensions that fascinate me between life and death, between civilization and the bestial, also between light and dark, also connections between, for example, sexuality and instinct, questions of the problem of evil.
What specifically about Dracula?
It is not the character of Dracula that fascinates me as much as the story. Although when I came to write my version of Dracula, my adaptation.
Yes, Wings of Dracula.
Yeah. Well, in a nutshell, I had to come up with my own take. And mine was to see that Dracula not as a human being at all, but rather as, a 400-year-old ghost who doesn't remember everything. One of the reasons for the title, The Wings of Dracula, is that in many ways he functions and almost thinks of himself as the angel of death.
I see. Speaking of character and speaking about Wings of Dracula, I must say, I read the play and...
Thank you.
Sure. And when Dracula first appears and says, "I am here," you got exactly what you wanted. I went, ooh. It really got me. And John, I know that you have a take on Dracula because you have a project.
Right. I'm working on the graphic novel Paul Bunyan versus Dracula, A Tall Tale of Terror. It's kind of funny how it came about because initially I was doing this as a one shot and maybe it was going to be 2 pages long. And you may have seen the student film for animation that came out some time ago, Godzilla versus Bambi.
Right.
Oh, classic.
And, and I was thinking, well, Paul Bunyan versus Dracula would be something like that.
All right.
And that maybe I would have Dracula and then a giant boot.
Right.
But as I was thinking about it, sort of making a list of what powers and abilities Dracula has, and that he has superhuman strength, he can't be killed by conventional means, super agility, can climb vertical surfaces, hypnosis, telepathy, can command animals, manipulate the weather. It kind of started to change, and I realized Dracula is not Bambi in this situation. Paul Bunyan is. And once I had that realization, I had a story.
Yes.
And it went from being 2 pages to 3 pages to now a 160-page graphic novel.
Got it. Now, David, in hearing this transition that John had with the material of Paul Bunyan versus Dracula, do you have a particular response to this?
The first thing that really stuck in my head is Babe would obey Dracula then.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Babe, the blue ox.
The blue ox, yeah. Paul Bunyan and Babe the blue ox.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that makes a big problem because, that and, be lightning.
Well said. Well said. So, David, at this point, share with us something about your projects.
That's what I've done. An adaptation of Dracula that's had one production. I've done an earlier production of Carmilla, another great vampire classic. That has been done about 8 times in the last 6 years.
Wow.
And I am on my way to producing an audio adaptation of Carmilla.
Tell us about Carmilla.
Carmilla, my Carmilla, or the novella Carmilla?
Let's begin with your Carmilla.
My Carmilla is an attempt to reimagine the story as I think a modern audience can better appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. I know in one of the versions that was mounted as a stage production that there is particularly a dance between Laura and Carmilla.
Yeah.
Would you address that?
Well, to have two characters dance together on stage, it's a gorgeous thing to see.
Yes.
It is inherently about what is happening between these two characters, but they must express it physically.
Mm-hmm.
The character Carmilla is teaching Laura how to tango.
Ah.
And at the same time, she's also insisting Laura lead.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, these are all sorts of little nuances that add up to a much more interesting and I think believable relationship, because the whole heart of that novella
mm-hmm.
and of my adaptations is that relationship. At least half the adaptations I've seen throw that pretty much out the window.
Oh, is it because those adaptations were squeamish? They wouldn't focus on the heart of the story?
I think it's because they usually include a suitably young male protagonist to be a love interest for Laura.
Oh, I see.
What happens when people do that, other than you're skewing the dynamic of the characters,
mm-hmm.
what nearly always happens is Laura then becomes a doll. She's no longer a character, she's just someone there that her male love interest and Carmilla are then tugging on this doll. And she loses all agency in those adaptations.
I saw part of a video review of one of the productions of Carmilla, and they had a comment related to, at some point in the play, Carmilla is insisting that Laura lead in the dance, mm-hmm. but Laura is pushing back against that. Maybe you would address that.
Part of it, as I thought of it when writing it, although actors can find other interpretations, is a habit of being submissive mm-hmm. that Laura has been ingrained into her. It is not, in my opinion, not something that is naturally part of her character.
Okay.
But it is a habit. Part of the relationship between Carmilla and Laura is that Carmilla is encouraging her to be stronger.
I think we've gotten a good preview of the depth and the power of Carmilla. Thank you for sharing with us some of your work that you're up to.
Oh, thanks for letting me flap my jaw.
Okay, I have a trilogy of urban fantasy novels called Gently Storm. Mm-hmm. And since it's urban fantasy, I have vampires, werewolves, dragons, shapeshifters. And what I want to share at this moment and get your take on, David, is this. In my trilogy of urban fantasy novels called Gently Storm, I have a vampire character who is one of my favorite characters I've ever written. Her name is Marta Chang. And at 17 years old, long, long ago in China, she was the favorite concubine of Lord Wu. And she loves Lord Wu with her young heart. But when Lord Wu is struck down in battle, is mortally wounded, she makes the decision to have herself turned into a vampire so that she would be the one to ease his transition into becoming a vampire, and so he could stay in existence on planet Earth. So when this happens and he comes back to consciousness and discovers that he is a vampire, he says these words, "Begone from me. You have defiled yourself. You have defiled me. This was not love. This was evil. You have destroyed me." And he breaks the martial arts bow, the staff, and he impales himself, and he is dead. 17-year-old Marta is left sobbing on the floor with his last words to her, to carry in her thoughts for centuries. In fact, she doesn't love again until the American Revolutionary War. And because of her actions so long ago related to Lord Wu, she is poisoned. Because of that poison, she goes berserk and tears her husband, Ethan, her beloved husband, limb from limb, tears him apart. Distraught, with grief again, she goes through more centuries until she loves one more time when she meets Jack Angelsword, and this is the mentor to Gently Storm. And so this is from my trilogy of novels called Gently Storm. David, my question for you is, in yourself as a vampire aficionado, and perhaps in your conversations with other vampire aficionados, is there something in this Marta Chang character that is compelling?
Well, the basics you describe are potentially very compelling. The thing that comes most to my mind is I recently came across a definition of trauma that I thought was extremely vivid, particularly for storytellers such as ourselves, which is that a trauma is an event that makes the story of your identity invalid.
Oh, okay.
So at that moment, in a very real sense, you're dead because who you were is dead and you can never be that person again. And it seems to me what you're describing is at least one or actually more of these traumas. And her issue is going to be then writing a new story. And that's hard. That's very, very hard to do, not least because when you look at the past, which you need to do, it hurts. It hurts a lot.
Got it.
So potentially, yes, this sounds like a really, really interesting story.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing all that up. At this point, we're going to go into character, and I'm just going to have a brief expression of elements that deepen a character. The character has a flaw, a want, a goal, a real need. For an example, I'll talk about a character named Nia. Now, Nia wants to get the attention of a young man. So there's her want. She enters a high school debate and she wants to win. That's her goal. And we know she wants this relationship with Stephen, but over the course of the story, she will experience her real need. And in this story, Nia's real need is to express herself, to be authentic. That presses her into making an outburst where she expresses herself and she destroys her chance to stay in the debate because she finds that the whole construction of the debate is flawed and unfair. So she loses her goal of winning the debate. She's thrown out by the administration, but she has connected with her real need. And what often happens with a great character is that she experiences a transformation along the way. David, do you have any comment about this point of view of character elements?
First of all, I applaud it because it is a matter of nuance.
Thank you.
Which is something I find often people don't use or even think about. And the nuance of the differences between these things, I think, are very important. So, bravo. And I also like that, in effect, each one is active and fundamental and gives in a different facet to the character.
John, is there something you'd like to add to this conversation about character?
When I think about character, the thing that I recall to mind is a movie critique, The Phantom Menace. And basically what they did was they interviewed a bunch of Star Wars fans and they asked them to describe different Star Wars characters. And they would throw out a name and say, okay, well, describe for me this character without describing their physical appearance, their title, or what their job is that they do. And so they would say, who is Han Solo? And they would say, oh, well, he's a cocky person who is kind of cynical, a little bit of a smart aleck. And then they would ask them a character from the Phantom Menace, and they would say, okay, describe for me Qui-Gon Jinn. And they would say, well, he's, they couldn't get anything. They were like, he's tall, he's a Jedi. And so they realized, through going through a series of these, that they could describe the characters in the original trilogy, even the droids, what their personalities were. But the flesh and bone main characters of the new series, they could not describe at all without listing their jobs or physical attributes. And so I think that's a good key for a writer to keep in mind. If you can't tell me who your person is without talking about their job or what they look like, you might not quite have a character yet.
Oh, I'll go further than that. You absolutely don't have a character yet.
There you go. And upon that comment, I am now going to say thank you to you both. You both are two of my closest friends. I'm so grateful we had this conversation. Thank you, John. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Someone made it all the way to the end. Hey, you might as well hit the subscribe button while you're here.
Please. Yeah, cool.